This video is sponsored by Nebula. I love games that feature brutalist architecture, and while the list of games that are centered around geometric concrete isn't the longest, titles like Babdi and Control have provided me with some of my favorite gaming memories ever. It's no wonder then that when I came across a short FPS that featured these structural visuals I adore so much, I made the correct assumption that it would be well worth my time. Metal Garden puts us into the shoes of a nomad wandering the vastness of a megastructure, an indescribably large shell of concrete and steel that has stood firm for the countless civilizations that have inhabited it. The game, unlike a lot of FPS campaigns, doesn't throw you into high-octane action or target practice. It doesn't invite you into its world with a conversation with a friendly character or the sound of a voice. Instead, it envelops you in the sound of strong winds and the gentle rumbling of a storm in the distance, with the sight of a burning cigarette resting in front of a grey landscape. Looking even the slightest bit upwards, the megastructure's presence is immediately noticeable, as even the clouds are trapped against the limits of a colossal ceiling. The feeling of insignificance and isolation is instant, and it lingers even at the very end. Examining the blocky hunk of metal in front of me, it was revealed my method of transport has broken down, and so I gathered my supplies and abandoned the vehicle, though not before gazing upon the enormous turbines and unfamiliar structures sticking out of the grey landscape beyond. A short distance later, I spotted a trio of enemies ahead and made the first move, shattering the ambience with my initial shot. The only noise to come from my opponents was a blaring horn to signal my presence, and the firing of their weapons in my direction, culminating in my first encounter of many. But these human figures wouldn't be the only living creatures I'd encounter, as I discover a camp of men with leopard heads laying in the wake of a battle nearby, one of whom was still barely alive. Before speaking with him though, I discovered an electronic journal trapped beneath one of the bodies that detailed the group's travels through two separate megastructure stratas, unveiling that whatever construct we're in has multiple layers. Interacting with the injured, regally dressed man nearby, I discovered that he is in fact the ruler of the kingdom of Rya Secretorum. Their mission was to traverse beyond the structure to reach what they believed to be heaven, and through information gathered by spies, it was found that the local industrialists called the Central Serenian Mining Group had indeed found a hole in the world. The king and his men seized the chance to use this escape route, but were promptly dealt with by the CSMG and their hired mercenaries, some of whom included disaffected Rya Secretorum members that accused the king of treachery. Within these initial first several minutes into the game, I was already left with so many questions. But most importantly, I wanted to know the purpose behind this megastructure and what lies beyond the wall. As I journeyed through open fields, complex industrial systems, and ancient ruins, I witnessed the signs of the many different civilizations that blossomed and crumbled within this strata. Occasionally I'd come across another log to read, which slowly unraveled tiny knots in the unknowable and immeasurable history of this megastructure, with its size and age expanding with every entry I consumed. It's hard not to notice some of the influences of this game, one of which is the work of Fumito Ueda. In his titles such as Shadow of the Colossus and Eco, we explore giant and mysterious ancient structures set against the backdrop of a natural expanse. And this concept, as well as certain architectural elements, can be recognized in Metal Garden's environments. However, Tsutomu Nihei, most known for his manga series Blame, would provide an especially large foundation for the megastructure setting. He is a master at building dark sci-fi worlds with an emphasis on biomechanical themes and impossibly large industrial landscapes. And practically every page of Blame invokes an oppressive insignificance through the scale of its unique infrastructure, which Nihei's background in architecture undoubtedly helped form. Likewise, the concrete ceiling and plummeting abysses in Metal Garden never let me forget the inconsequential existence of the lonely nomad I played as, both through their relation to the megastructure and the other beings they'd come into contact with. Even at the beginning, we see that the protagonist has set off a beacon to let others know they can come and rummage the broken down transport for scraps. There's no direct communication with anyone, and we leave before they arrive. There's no real connection to be had with anything or anyone. We continue alone and are met with danger and hostility. The opponents throughout the game almost entirely consist of mercenaries belonging to the CSMG. which is made up of its humanesque workforce and also its hired Rhea Secretorum guards, all of whom were carrying out orders to stop anyone from reaching the exit they discovered, and even destroying the escape route altogether using explosives. As far as shooters go, I didn't find combat to be challenging at all, at least on normal difficulty. The Rhea enemies are only able to fight close up with swords, whereas the more technologically advanced CSMG members wield guns. Sometimes fights take place in more open areas, and other moments are comparatively claustrophobic. And while weapon and enemy variation is limited, the game is under 2 hours long anyway, so it didn't end up being an issue for me. I'd even say the hollowness of combat in a weird way matched the atmosphere. That being said, there are some interesting mechanics when it comes to combat, whereby if you take enough damage, a particular part of your body will sustain an injury. Depending on the part that's been damaged, you'll have to deal with a side effect such as an impeded sprint or decreased max health. Healing items won't heal these wounds, but you can do so at an auto-surgery unit, which can be found every so often along the game's path. Speaking of the FPS genre, I did have a casual chat with the creator to understand some of the inspiration she had for the game. I was delighted to find that shooters from Valve and Bungie had some influence, since the atmosphere of Metal Garden heavily reminded me of ambient scenes and visuals from Half-Life 2 and Halo. Plus, there are a fair few environmental puzzles in the game too, incorporating platforming elements into the mix. There are even entire sections that are optional, which reward you with more resources, lore, or even a new weapon. But even without those incentives, the structures and sites you lay your eyes upon are worthy of the detour. The developer was also inspired by the countryside of Croatia and the industrial landscapes like bridges and factories that she would pass by in her daily life, prompting the idea of a decayed artificial garden world serving as a tiny part of a much larger structure. The fields of disconnected power lines feel familiar yet distant, providing one of the many instances of the relationship between the natural and the man-made. More modern technology grows on ancient architecture like lichen on a brick wall, and clusters of pipes simulate the roots and trunk of a tree. It's the kind of brutalist and industrial architecture I find most fascinating, where it blends elements of two opposing worlds until it's difficult to distinguish between them. Another visual influence was the work of John Harris, a painter and illustrator whose work has graced the covers of numerous sci-fi novels. He would often feature massive, isolated structures set upon the backdrop of an endless horizon, slightly fading them into one another using a low-contrast palette. Metal Garden also uses a limited palette, employing a blanket of desaturation and modest shadows to seamlessly fuse the subjects within its landscapes, which makes them appear even larger. The remnants of cycles of civilisations submerged into the earth of this megastructure strata brings to mind a specific kind of post-apocalypse setting, but one that has repeatedly recovered from its preceding collapse. Whatever ended these ancient cities doesn't matter. We only see what has emerged from the thousands of years that came after, and how they build and learn from the discoveries of the past. It's a sentiment that Curious Archive covers in the video titled My Favourite Kind of Post-Apocalypse, highlighting the unique characteristics of a post-post-apocalypse within the context of fictional worlds. There's a mention of Rainworld in the video, which is one of my favourite games ever. I was also reminded that this concept of a thriving ecosystem existing in an industrial landscape is something that is shared with Metal Garden. This video is available only on Nebula, which is an ever-growing creator-owned streaming service. There's no shortage of thought-provoking Nebula-exclusive videos to indulge in, with creators like Jacob Geller and King K releasing companion videos and standalone essays on subjects like holes and the addictive formula of roguelikes. Even I have one where I talk about the weird world of the PlayStation 3's demo scene and its legacy, as well as featuring as a guest on an episode of the Something Rotten podcast discussing Silent Hill 3. I also provide early access for my other videos like the one you're watching right now, and the viewing experience is ad-free, easy access, and supports creators like myself. By using my link, you can get 40% off of Nebula, so that's just $36 for an entire year or $3 a month at go.nebula.tv/Eurothug4000. There are extra options for a lifetime subscription, gift cards, and as a Nebula subscriber, you can get a guest pass to share with friends too. Go and check out the videos I mentioned and treat yourself to an impressive catalogue of Nebula originals and more. To really go into depth about the story, I am going to have to talk about the ending, so let this be a spoiler warning for you from now until the end of the video. And with that, let's get into Metal Garden's final 2 chapters. Eventually, after fighting and platforming your way along the path to the famed exit of the Megastructure, you reach an arena-like area where you have to fight off one last horde of Rya and CSMG mercenaries while you wait for the gate to open. Once that's over, you get what is one of my favourite views in the game, granting you a peaceful open vista featuring a waterfall and hills with grazing herds in the distance. The last stretch of garden before the end. A lone tunnel entrance sits in the middle of the water beckoning your entry, but a few steps forward triggers the appearance of our final opponent courtesy of the CSMG, the MC-172 Border Watcher. Ultimately triumphing over my foe after dodging its powerful attacks and unleashing a barrage of my own, there was nothing between me and the hole in the world. I proceeded through the doorway and down the steps, tackling the giant chasms laid ahead of me as I witnessed the signs of CSMG's explosions. Eventually, I reached some kind of vacant control room and ventured to the back, discovering a curious lever which awakens blinking lights upon the room's walls, resembling a starry night sky that any inhabitant of this world couldn't have ever possibly seen. Going back to the main room, I noticed a terminal had whirred back to life, spitting out repeating phrases that indicate its operating hours have exceeded 3 million years, begging for replacement. As well as the pitiable machine, a bridge forward similarly sprung into action which led me into the maintenance shaft, with a chain of carts left abandoned upon the tracks. Using these, I could reach the platform on the other side, and I could finally see what existed beyond the wall. A distant crimson planet was cushioned among a sea of clouds with no visible ceiling above it, only an unknown grey expanse. Another terminal stood off to my left, one with an image of a pillar and the same planet in front of us depicted orbiting it. But before I made any assumptions, I opened the logs that would reveal the purpose of this world. This structure we just surpassed the outer shell of is a counterweight world, a physically smaller, although much heavier part of a far larger megastructure. These counterweight worlds are built to gravitationally bind orbits of planets and other celestial bodies that would be in the way of the outer structure's expansion, preventing them from causing any damage to the overall structure and its stability. The terminal details that these worlds, of which there are multiple, were most often built in the earliest ages of construction, and especially in what is regarded as the former inner solar system, implying the planet we see in front of us is Mars. In fact, the overall megastructure's expansion is noted to have surpassed even the Kuiper Belt. I had to stop for a moment, thinking back to the initial stages of the game where we find out that there are walls and a ceiling. Then, not long after that, we learn there are multiple layers. Then we discover there are entire civilizations buried deep within the layers of sediment of the singular layer, and all these layers are just a floor within a colossal column that is barely even a toothpick within an unfathomable outer structure. This exterior we reach isn't outside at all, it's just another inside. Like a small nail embedded into a floorboard of a room within a mansion. Throughout our journey, there are ceilings upon ceilings, caves within buildings within domes, all encased within each other like an infinite Russian doll. Even the living beings have layers. The CSMG and Rhea Secretorum have their own hierarchies with leaders, kings, and workforces. Metal Garden unfolds its historical and structural scale like zooming out of an endless microscope. Once the logs had finished dispensing this information, I made my way into the metal cage serving as a lift, descending to the ceiling below, watching my screen fade to black with closing text to bid me farewell. It reads, "Many hours later, the elevator descends to its lowest point, at last coming to a halt above raging oceans of liquid coolant, the industrial towers holding up the ceiling like mythological giants of ancient tales. Finally preparing to leave the elevator and facing an ever-stranger landscape, you nonetheless find the familiar step of your nomadic wandering returning, the promise engraved in every mile travelled that the seeking itself is the answer." The ending is anticlimactic and in the most effective way. There is no end in sight to this greater megastructure. There is no lifetime one could live that would overcome even a meaningful fraction of it. It is physically and narratively endless, like time itself. To explain a bit more about the origins of some aspects of the counterweight world and its creators, we also find out from that ending terminal that the original builders would eventually abandon these megastructures once their work was complete. Before this though, they would make sure to leave behind species that were chosen based on biological parameters that would render them most suited to specific tasks for the structure's future preservation. The leopard people and the CSMG members we see would have each evolved from one of these species, which explains their physical differences. The kind that make up CSMG, however, have likely come from a species that inhabit low-light environments, meaning that their UV light-sensitive skin has to be fully covered with clothing. Due to their higher technological advancement though, they're able to dim the lights of the ceiling to adjust the conditions of the strata to their needs, which is also a feat that had gained them political popularity and full control over the domain. The group manufactures both weapons and transportation, and herald mining projects and build dams for the sake of energy production. Their latest dam construction revealed one of the maintenance exits from the inner megastructure they reside in, and better yet, they measured practically no UV light outside, which would mean perfect conditions for them. Ultimately though, they decide to conceal this revelation, as they feared that their people would choose to leave this land and system that the CSMG have control over, so they immediately began to plan the destruction of the miraculous exit. Regarding the group's reaction, the developer mentioned, "I like this kind of almost tragedy, I guess, of people at the top of a system of exploitation deciding to sacrifice even their own long-term standards of living for the momentary gain of perpetuating the system in the short term." This brings us back to the selection of species that the original builders would have left in the first place, which we know was to ensure the structure's future stability. Those left to live and evolve inside this concrete world would have never been aware of their purpose, nor that they reside within a counterweight world, but CSMG discovered both the exit and the truth. Their decision to protect their system and assets aligns with both their own self-preservation and the original builders' intent to have a species or multiple that would be able to thrive and develop in the structure, even allowing one to ascend to godlike status by controlling the ceiling lights. On the topic of deities, there are a few references to Greek mythology within Metal Garden. One of these can be seen during the fight with the Border Watcher, where you can unlock an achievement called Titanomachy by breaking one of its components. The Titanomachy was a decade-long war between the Titans, the older generation of gods, and the Olympians, the newer generation led by Zeus. The Olympians ended up victorious and assumed command of the universe, in most cases imprisoning and punishing the Titans they defeated. Atlas, for example, was condemned to hold up the sky, which came to mind at the end of Metal Garden when it describes the counterweight worlds as industrial towers holding up the ceiling like mythological giants of ancient tales. The idea of generations of gods taking over from one another can be recognized in the constant cycle of ruling civilisations within the inner megastructure, or even the act of the original creators leaving behind living creations to eventually inherit their construction in a sense. Our own protagonist, in defeating the last obstacle of the CSMG, breaks free of the system and the humanoid gods that perpetuate it, gaining freedom, knowledge, and power beyond any other of their kind. Religious elements are embedded within Rhea Secretorum's search for heaven and God beyond the structure, whose name Rhea is that of the mother of Zeus, and also symbolises bounty and fertility, though in the end their expedition was shattered by the true nature of the world they inhabited. During one of the game's midsections, there's a part where we find the ruins of an older civilization that a nearby log describes as belonging to the Velomir people, who attempted to build a tower to reach the very ceiling of the world, and what seems to reference the Tower of Babel story in the Book of Genesis. Evidently, they did not succeed, and the remains of their spiraling walkway to heaven barely makes it to the top of the underground cave it's now buried in. According to the game's creator, the Culture book series by Ian M. Banks inspired Metal Garden's massive scale of its civilisations, in addition to the feeling of being caught between big political powers, but as too small of a player to shift the tide in a meaningful way. The protagonists don't save or destroy this world, they struggle in it and witness it. Unlike FPS campaigns I've played in the past where you're basically the prophesized hero destined to save the world, there's no real significance to the nomad we play as in the game. Their transport broke down by chance, and they simply followed the path ahead of them, with this existential insignificance only heightening the oppressive nature of the megastructure. Metal Garden leaves plenty of questions for a sequel to answer, and hopefully we'll eventually get to see a return to this fascinating world. Please consider supporting the developer Tenerisoft and trying out the game for yourselves if you haven't already. It's got a number of playthrough modifiers, so you can customize your experience as you wish, even letting you enjoy an exploration mode if you simply want to appreciate the architecture and art direction. A big thank you for watching, and if you want to see my future work, feel free to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.